When I first bought the house on Maplewood Drive, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It wasn't just a home. It was a dream come true. The house itself was cozy, 3 bedrooms, a nice backyard, and plenty of sunlight streaming through the windows. But what really sold me was the little strip of land behind the property. Technically, it wasn't part of my yard, but it might as well have been. It was wide open, untouched, and bordered by tall trees that gave it a sense of privacy. I imagined planting a garden there someday or setting up a hammock to relax in during summer evenings. For 2 years, everything went smoothly. Life felt peaceful. My neighbors were friendly enough. We exchanged waves when we passed each other on the street, but they mostly kept to themselves, which suited me fine. I liked having my own space. That's why it hurt so much when the HOA decided to take even that away from me. It started with a letter. One day, I came home from work and found an envelope tucked under my doormat. At first glance, it looked harmless, a plain white piece of paper with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association logo at the top. But as I read through the lines, my stomach sank. According to them, the empty land behind my house didn't belong to me after all. It belonged to the HOA. They wanted to use it for something called community enhancement. I stared at the letter, trying to process what it meant. Community enhancement. What did that even mean? And how could they claim ownership of land that had always felt like mine? Sure, I knew about the HOA fees and the rules about keeping lawns trimmed and houses painted, but this felt different. This felt personal. I tried fighting back. First, I sent emails asking for clarification. Then, when those went unanswered, I hired a lawyer. For months, I poured money and energy into proving that the land should stay with me, or at least get compensation if they insisted on taking it. But no matter how hard I fought, the odds were stacked against me. Eventually, the court ruled in favor of the HOA. Just like that, the land was gone. The worst part wasn't losing the battle. It was watching them destroy what little piece I had left. Bulldozers rolled in early one morning, tearing up the quiet patch of earth that had once been my refuge. Within days, it was transformed into a walking trail, complete with benches, lampposts, and signs welcoming everyone to enjoy the new community feature. People began wandering past my backyard at all hours of the day, laughing, chatting, and acting like they owned the place. I couldn't stand it. Every time I looked out my window and saw strangers strolling along the path, I felt violated. How dare they march onto what used to be my land without giving me a say? It wasn't fair, and yet there was nothing I could do about it, or so I thought. One night, as I sat on my porch staring at the newly installed trail, an idea popped into my head. It was wild, maybe even crazy, but it made me smile for the first time in weeks. If they thought they could take my land without consequences, they were wrong. Dead wrong. What happened next changed everything. For me, for the HOA, and for the entire neighborhood. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. A ridiculous, over-the-top solution that felt so absurd it just might work. If the HOA wanted to take my land and turn it into their precious walking trail, fine. But they weren't going to get away with it for free. Oh no, I was about to make them regret ever setting foot near my backyard. I started sketching plans late that night, scribbling ideas on scraps of paper until my desk looked like the aftermath of a brainstorming tornado. What I envisioned wasn't just any wall. It would be bold, loud, and impossible to ignore. Something that screamed, "This is mine." 10 feet tall, neon green, and covered in features they'd never expect. A wall unlike anything anyone in Maplewood Drive had ever seen. Construction began early Monday morning. I hired a crew who promised discretion. But let's face it, there's no discreet way to build a massive cinder block structure in someone's backyard. By noon, half the neighborhood had gathered outside, craning their necks to watch as the wall slowly rose higher and higher. Some people snapped photos, others whispered among themselves, trying to figure out what on earth I was doing. Margaret Hensley arrived right on cue, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement as she marched toward my driveway. She had this pinched expression on her face, like she'd just bitten into something sour. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the growing wall like it was some kind of alien spaceship. "It's modern art," I said with a shrug, leaning casually against a stack of cinder blocks. "You should feel lucky. You'll have front row seats." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For once, she didn't seem to know what to say. Behind her, a few neighbors stifled laughs, while others exchanged nervous glances. Clearly, not everyone hated the idea of sticking it to the HOA. But here's where things got interesting. The wall wasn't just for show. On the side facing my yard, I added shelves, hooks, and storage compartments. It became functional. A place to hang tools, store gardening supplies, or display decorations. On the other side, the HOA's shiny new walking trail. I installed gates, lockboxes, and even a keypad entry system. Anyone who wanted to use the trail now had to pay a fee. That's right, I charged them rent. Every detail was deliberate. Bright neon paint made sure no one could miss it. Signs went up explaining the situation in simple terms. Access restricted. Pay $50/month for entry code. People stopped mid-walk, staring at the notices like they couldn't believe their eyes. Joggers turned around, muttering under their breath. Parents carrying strollers hesitated, unsure whether to climb over the wall, which, trust me, looked awkward, or give up entirely. The HOA freaked out. They sent letters demanding I remove the obstruction immediately. Fines piled up in my mailbox, accusing me of violating community guidelines and disrupting harmony. But none of it fazed me. Every dollar they fined me, I doubled in rent fees. Let them try to keep up. Word spread fast. Neighbors talked about nothing else for days. Some were furious, calling me selfish or unreasonable. Others secretly loved it, stopping by to congratulate me on finally standing up to Margaret and her cronies. One elderly man named Mr. Peterson even brought over a six-pack of beer and patted me on the back. About time someone taught them a lesson. He chuckled. By the end of the week, the wall had become more than just a barrier. It was a symbol of defiance, creativity, and maybe even hope for those tired of being pushed around. And as for me, I couldn't wait to see what happened next. The wall didn't just divide my property from the HOA's walking trail. It split the neighborhood right down the middle. Some people hated it, others loved it, and a few didn't know what to think. But one thing was certain. Everyone had an opinion. Margaret Hensley was livid. She called emergency meetings, sent out mass emails, and even organized protests in front of my house. Flyers appeared on doors across Maplewood Drive, accusing me of ruining the beauty and harmony of the community. One particularly dramatic sign read, "This wall is destroying our neighborhood." I almost laughed when I saw it, like the HOA cared about beauty or harmony when they tore up my land to build their precious trail. But not everyone agreed with Margaret. Late one evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, a young couple from down the street approached me. They looked nervous, glancing over their shoulders like they were afraid someone might catch them talking to me. "We just wanted to say, we think what you're doing is brave," the woman said quietly. Her husband nodded, adding, "The HOA has been pushing us around for years. Maybe this will finally make them listen." Their words stuck with me. It wasn't just about my backyard anymore. This was bigger than me. It was about standing up to bullies who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. And slowly, I began to notice subtle signs of support. Anonymous donations showed up in my mailbox, cash stuffed into blank envelopes. Someone painted a mural on the outer side of the wall overnight, depicting a giant phoenix rising from ashes. The message was clear: resilience. Even kids started leaving notes taped to the wall, thanking me for fighting back. Of course, not all reactions were positive. Margaret led daily marches along the trail, carrying banners that demanded the wall be torn down. She tried rallying her loyal followers, but her usual crew seemed less enthusiastic than before. A few neighbors avoided eye contact altogether, while others muttered under their breath about how ridiculous the whole situation had become. One night, someone egged the wall so thoroughly it looked like an abstract art project gone wrong. Another time, I woke up to find graffiti scrawled across the keypad. "You can't win. Nice try, though." Meanwhile, life on the trail ground to a halt. Walkers and joggers found themselves stuck halfway through their routes, forced to either turn around or awkwardly climb over the wall. Videos of people attempting, and failing, to scale the 10-foot structure went viral online, turning my little rebellion into a national joke. Reporters called nonstop, asking for interviews. Social media exploded with hashtags like hashtag the Great Wall of Maplewood and hashtag HOA blocker. Strangers drove from miles away just to see the infamous wall for themselves. Through it all, I stood firm. Every complaint, every threat, only fueled my determination. When Margaret showed up at my door one afternoon, red-faced and shouting about fines and penalties, I simply smiled. "If you don't like the wall," I said calmly, "you're welcome to stop using the trail. Or pay the fee. Your choice." Her jaw dropped, but she couldn't argue. Legally, there was nothing she could do. The wall sat entirely on my property, and the keypad system blocked access unless users paid up. Sure, the HOA could fine me, but every dollar they charged me, I doubled in rent fees. Let them try to keep up. As weeks turned into months, the wall became more than just a barrier. It became a statement, a reminder that sometimes fighting back isn't about winning or losing. It's about refusing to stay silent. And deep down, I knew the HOA would never forget the day I turned their perfect little neighborhood upside down. As the days turned into weeks, the wall didn't just stand as a physical barrier. It became a symbol of resistance. And with that symbolism came unexpected alliances. People I'd barely spoken to before started showing up at my doorstep, offering support in ways both small and surprising. Mr. Peterson, the retired engineer from across the street, became one of my most vocal advocates. He'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone and had seen the HOA's power grow unchecked over the years. "This wall," he said one evening, leaning on his cane, "is the first thing that's made them sweat in decades." He wasn't wrong. Margaret Hensley looked like she was aging 10 years in 10 days. Her once polished demeanor cracked under the pressure of constant protests, endless emails, and the growing divide within the community. She tried rallying her loyalists, but even they seemed less enthusiastic about defending the HOA's actions. At one meeting, a woman stood up and asked why the association hadn't compensated me for taking my land in the first place. The room fell silent. Margaret stammered something about legal technicalities, but no one looked convinced. Meanwhile, the wall kept evolving. What started as a bold statement grew into something functional and even fun. On my side, I added shelves and hooks for tools, turning it into a storage space that doubled as a workshop. On the trail side, I installed interactive games and puzzles, challenging walkers to solve riddles or press buttons in sequence to unlock gates. Kids loved it, dragging their parents along just to play. One afternoon, I caught a group of teenagers laughing hysterically as they worked together to figure out how to open a locked section of the trail. It felt strange, almost satisfying, to see people enjoying something I'd built, even if it started as an act of defiance. But not everyone was amused. Margaret and her inner circle ramped up their efforts to tear the wall down. They filed formal complaints with the city, claiming it violated zoning laws. They circulated petitions demanding its removal. Some neighbors who had stayed neutral until now began speaking out against me, accusing me of being selfish or unreasonable. One man yelled across the street that I was destroying property values. I shrugged it off, knowing full well that the real issue wasn't the wall. It was the fact that someone had finally dared to challenge the HOA's authority. Despite the backlash, cracks were forming in the HOA's foundation. More and more residents began questioning their decisions, not just about the wall, but about everything. Why did we need permission to paint our front doors certain colors? Who decided how high our grass could grow before it became a nuisance? Slowly, people started realizing how much control the HOA had taken without anyone noticing. Even some of Margaret's closest allies began distancing themselves. Mrs. Grayson, a longtime board member known for her strict adherence to rules, admitted privately that she thought the HOA had gone too far. "We should have handled this differently," she told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. She quickly added, "Don't tell anyone I said that." But her words gave me hope. If even the enforcers were having second thoughts, maybe real change was possible. The tension reached a boiling point when someone leaked internal AOA documents online. Emails revealed heated arguments among board members about how to deal with me, as well as plans to increase fees to cover legal costs. The leak spread like wildfire, sparking outrage among residents. For the first time, people openly criticized the HOA at meetings, demanding transparency and accountability. Through it all, I remained steadfast. Every attempt to intimidate me only strengthened my resolve. The wall wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt powerless against the HOA's iron grip. And while I knew the fight wasn't over, I also knew one thing for sure. I'd already won the war for respect. The HOA finally played their last card. They sued me. Again. This time, they claimed the wall was a public nuisance and demanded its immediate removal. Margaret Hensley led the charge, her voice dripping with indignation, as she accused me of ruining the neighborhood and endangering residents. The lawsuit felt like a desperate attempt to regain control, but it also meant one thing. I'd hit a nerve. Deep down, I knew they were scared. Scared that if I won, it would set a precedent. Scared that other homeowners might follow my lead and start questioning their authority. I wasn't about to back down. With the help of a sharp-witted lawyer who believed in my case and maybe enjoyed sticking it to the HOA as much as I did, I prepared for battle. We gathered evidence, photos of the trail before and after the wall, documents proving the structure sat entirely on my property, and testimonials from neighbors who supported my cause. Some of them came forward publicly, while others preferred to stay anonymous, slipping notes into my mailbox or leaving encouraging voicemails. One neighbor even handed me a signed petition during a quiet moment at the grocery store, saying, "We've got your back." The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters packed the benches, eager to cover what had become a national story. Social media lit up with hashtags like #WallWars and #HOARebellion. Margaret sat stiffly beside her team of lawyers, clutching her purse like it was a life raft. She avoided eye contact with me altogether, which told me everything I needed to know. She was nervous. When the judge called the court to order, Margaret took the stand first. Her testimony was dramatic, filled with grand statements about community values and safety concerns. But under cross-examination, her arguments began to crumble. When asked why the HOA hadn't compensated me for taking my land, she stumbled over her words. When questioned about how the wall actually harmed anyone, she could only offer vague complaints about aesthetics. By the time she stepped down, her polished facade had cracked wide open. Then it was my turn. Standing in front of the judge, I laid out my case calmly but firmly. I explained how the HOA had seized my land without consent or compensation, ignoring my protests every step of the way. I showed photos of bulldozers tearing through what had once been my peaceful backyard, replacing it with a walking trail that benefited everyone except me. I pointed out that the wall didn't block access. It simply required users to pay a fair fee for using private property. "You see," I said, addressing the judge directly, "this isn't just about a wall. It's about standing up when someone tries to take what's yours without asking. It's about saying no when people think they can walk all over you because they hold a little bit of power." The room fell silent. Even Margaret seemed to shrink in her seat. When I finished speaking, I felt a sense of relief, not because I expected to win, but because I'd said everything I needed to say. Whether the ruling went my way or not, I'd already made my point. After what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his decision. He ruled in my favor, declaring that the wall was legal since it stood entirely on my property. He dismissed the HOA's claims of nuisance, noting that their own actions, the seizure of my land, had created far more disruption than anything I'd done. As he banged his gavel to close the case, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me with questions. Neighbors cheered, some patting me on the back or shaking my hand. Margaret stormed past, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The wall wasn't coming down, and neither was I. With the lawsuit behind me and the wall firmly in place, I decided to take things a step further. If the HOA thought they could push me around without consequences, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The wall had already become a symbol of resistance, but now it was time to turn it into something more. A statement, a business, and maybe even a movement. First, I opened a small gift shop on the trail side of the wall. It wasn't fancy, just a wooden kiosk stocked with snacks, bottled water, and novelty items like t-shirts and keychains. One of the shirts read, "Ask me about my HOA horror stories," which quickly became a bestseller. People loved the humor, and soon neighbors who had once avoided me were stopping by to chat or buy a trinket. Even some of Margaret's loyalists couldn't resist picking up a souvenir, though they pretended not to laugh at the jokes printed on them. The shop wasn't just for fun, it was practical too. All proceeds went toward maintaining the wall and funding future projects. I added solar-powered lights along the trail, installed benches with quirky plaques that said things like, "Rest area sponsored by your local rebel," and even set up a free library where walkers could borrow books. These improvements softened some of the criticism. A few neighbors admitted privately that the wall had actually made the trail better, not worse. But the real game changer came when I launched a podcast called Behind the Wall *. Each episode featured interviews with homeowners from across the country who shared their own battles with HOAs. Some stories were infuriating, others hilarious, but all of them resonated with listeners tired of being pushed around. Downloads skyrocketed, turning my little rebellion into a national conversation. Strangers reached out to thank me, saying I'd inspired them to stand up for themselves. One man sent me a photo of his own tiny protest, a garden gnome holding a sign that read, "Keep out, HOA." Not everyone was thrilled, of course. Margaret tried to rally her troops, organizing protests and petition drives to have the wall torn down. Flyers appeared on doors accusing me of ruining property values and destroying community spirit. Some nights, eggs splattered against the wall, and someone spray-painted "Tear it down" in big red letters. But these acts of vandalism only strengthened my resolve and rallied more support. Anonymous donations poured in, helping me cover repairs and keep the wall looking sharp. Margaret's grip on the neighborhood began slipping. Her resignation came suddenly, announced during a tense HOA meeting where tempers flared and accusations flew. Rumor had it she couldn't handle the stress anymore, or maybe she realized her reputation was beyond repair. Whatever the reason, her departure marked a turning point. Her replacement, Linda, was quieter and more reasonable. Within weeks, she proposed changes to many of the HOA's strict rules, earning cautious applause from residents. Still, not everyone forgave me. Some neighbors continued glaring at me from across the street or muttering under their breath about how I'd ruined everything. Others refused to walk past the wall altogether, choosing alternate routes instead. But most people seemed to warm up to the idea that standing up for yourself didn't mean tearing others down. They started seeing the wall less as an obstacle and more as a reminder of what could happen when you fought back. Every morning, I sipped coffee on my porch, watching walkers tap in their codes to access the trail. Kids giggled as they pressed buttons on the interactive games I'd installed. Neighbors waved hello, some stopping to thank me for sparking change. Yes, there were still grumbles, but overall, the neighborhood felt lighter. freer, like we'd finally shaken off the weight of fear and conformity. And as for me, I learned that sometimes the best way to fight back isn't quietly or politely. Sometimes you need to build a giant neon green wall and make them pay rent. Because when they steal your land, you don't just let them walk all over you. You make them trip first. Today, the wall stands tall and proud, a neon green monument to defiance, creativity, and the power of standing up for yourself. It's no longer just a barrier, it's a landmark, a conversation starter, and, in its own quirky way, a work of art. People from all over the neighborhood, and even beyond, come to see it, snap photos, and share their thoughts. Some call it ridiculous, others call it brilliant, but everyone agrees on one thing: it changed Maplewood Drive forever. Every morning, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the world interact with the wall. Walkers tap in their codes to access the trail, joggers pause to stretch near the benches I installed, and kids giggle as they play with the interactive games along the outer side. The mural of the phoenix rising from ashes still shines brightly, a symbol of resilience that resonates with so many people. Even Margaret Hensley occasionally glares at it from her window, though these days she mostly keeps to herself. The neighborhood has shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. The HOA isn't the same iron-fisted entity it once was. Under Linda's leadership, they've relaxed some of their stricter rules, like the ban on colorful front doors or holiday decorations, and started holding more open meetings where residents can voice their opinions. Sure, there are still disagreements, but now they feel less like battles and more like conversations. People have learned to speak up, to question authority, and to demand fairness. And while not everyone loves me for what I did, most admit that the wall sparked something important, a sense of unity and empowerment. As for me, life feels different too. I'm no longer the quiet guy who blends into the background. Neighbors stop by regularly to chat, ask questions, or share stories about their own struggles with HOAs or unfair regulations. My podcast, Behind the Wall, continues to grow, connecting me with homeowners across the country who face similar challenges. It's humbling and inspiring to know that my little rebellion has inspired others to take a stand. Of course, the wall hasn't solved everything. There are still grumbles, debates, and occasional acts of vandalism. But those moments feel smaller now, overshadowed by the positive changes that have taken root. The walking trail is busier than ever, thanks in part to the improvements I made. And the community feels closer somehow. People wave more often, linger longer during evening strolls, and seem genuinely invested in making Maplewood Drive a better place. Looking back, I never imagined that losing a strip of land would lead to this. What started as an act of frustration turned into a movement, a reminder that sometimes fighting back isn't just about winning or losing. It's about refusing to stay silent when someone tries to take what's yours. It's about finding creative ways to reclaim your power, even if it means building a giant, eye-catching wall and charging rent. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. Because when they tried to walk all over me, I didn't just let them. I made them trip first, and in doing so, I built something unforgettable.